And so the first thing that I wanted to do, and I'm not sure exactly how this is going to work, but is to ask if any of the speakers will have questions or comments for other speakers. Okay. And then once that's done, so that we can start a conversation. And then once that's done, then we can all join in. So that's my first request. So would any of you want to say something, ask something, comment on something? And we can take time, the real time, to think about this. Thanks, Al.
I have a question for you. This goes back to what I was saying. I'm always stuck between sort of wanting this sort of unified, no interior, no exterior, sort of non-dual view. But then, your amazing lecture where it was, right, the mechanisms of the brain, and you can see sort of the, I'm just wondering how you feel sort of about, sort of this idea of, right, about objective reality versus non-objective reality, particularly, for my community of physicists who want to have this idea that physical laws, and those physical laws are just out there, and they're, so I'm just wondering, is there reconciling to be done, or how do you see it yourself?
So if we were to destroy all beings with brains, would there still be a world? It's a little bit like that.
Yeah.
So that's a question for all of us. Another question for all of you is, if mental events are realized in some substrate, whether energy or nothingness, how can mental events be causal of events at the level of the substrate? So this is the epiphenomenalism problem, right? Mental events are realized in neurons, which are realized in atomic events, which are realized maybe in vacuum disturbances or, emptiness. How can they be causal of events? It would seem that you're picking yourself up by your bootstraps. So I think this problem of consciousness or experience, there's deeper problems, and the deeper problem is mental causation. So then Western philosophy David Hume said, either it's total determinism, in which case you have no say in the matter, because before you were born it was already predetermined what you would do at each moment. That, or it's utter randomness, in which case you also have no say in the matter, because it's random stuff. Is there a middle path between those two? My own view is yes, that a new kind of causation came into the universe with the advent of biological systems, which went beyond sort of Newtonian conceptions of causation, of energy transfer, in that they didn't emphasize the amount of energy, the inertia of energy, or the momentum of energy, or any of that, but they emphasized phase. Now by phase, I mean spatial and temporal patterns. So even at the level of a membrane channel and some neuron, it's looking not for the amount of the energy in the molecules, it's looking for the shape. That's a really different kind of causation than is going on for atoms. And neurons are looking for patterns of temporal coincidence, not for amounts. And so once phase causation came into physical systems through this accidental, I think, discovery by some physical systems, which we now call life, we just build and build and build and build and build on it. And the consciousness, as we experience, I think, is the end result of incredible amounts of evolution that build on that kind of causation. So I'll just say finally that if it's true what quantum theory says, that there's many possible futures, physical futures, mental events can be causal not as a force, but by selecting, by changing the criteria or parameters of what will count as informational satisfaction. It sculpts out of all those physically possible things just that subset, which is also an informational causal path. So it's a different notion of causation rather than impact of selection.
Well, there's lots to say, I suppose, and also nothing to say. Yeah, I think that.
Says you can't hear us.
Oh, can you hear?
Can't hear it at all.
Is this the mic working? Not at all.
It's on.
No, they're close.
Really close. Very close. Can you hear now?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we have a tendency to fall into concepts that, although they can be useful, they can also be hindering to what we're trying to grapple with. So, when we use concepts like cause, or when we use concepts like mind versus body, sometimes they're not so helpful. So that's why I tried to rephrase things in terms of life. So questions about whether consciousness has any kind of causal role to play from a biological perspective. If we're thinking of consciousness in terms of a life process or a life regulation process, I think we have every reason to think that interoception, perception, awareness, attention, some of the things that that Peter was talking about in his talk, that those are very much influencing all sorts of events at all sorts of different scales, molecular to large-scale movement of animals in their environment. So I personally am not really moved by the problem of mental causation as it's classically posed in philosophy, because I think it's part of a way of thinking that, again, sets things up in terms of the mind versus the body, where I think of life, the concept of life is not really capturable in that dichotomy. So I think what you were just saying now, I think I feel very sympathetic to the idea that there are different kinds of relations of dependency, and when you have animal life, you have a whole new ways in which events are interdependent in the world.
I have a novice question for you, Shinye, which is this. We in the West here, we live in a life where, as you said, there's all the accolades and going for things and success and how you project yourself to the world and how you're perceived by others. And these things are so hard to reconcile with the proposal of detachment or divesting yourself from attachment. And that must be something that a lot of people that come to you very confused about, because they're two very different ways of living. So I wonder if you have anything to say about this.
Where do I begin? Attachment always breeds misery. That's again getting back to motivation, when we are trying to arrange our lives around what we can get, rather than being true to the moment so that we know what we can give, which comes from this moment that is not under anyone else's influence. It is just this moment, this pure lucid awareness. Then we know what we do is going to be coming from this truth that we can realize and that we can offer. So a lot of people feel, well, if I really adhere to that way of living, then I will lose all of my ability to succeed at my profession. Actually, no. I think the more we return to this kind of present-minded awareness, the more what we do is seen as something really useful, really beneficial, really revolutionary, the way Bodhidharma was. This is to have trust in the fact that truth is everywhere. And we get in the way by our goal setting. It doesn't mean that we don't do every bit of hard work that it takes. I spoke about Hakuin saying it takes a daring mind. But with what mind do we approach mind? So I wanted to read you a poem by Mary Oliver, because I think it's very relevant to what we're speaking about. This is my opportunity to hold the mic and do this. I can do it. A lot of you probably even know this poem, The Blue Iris. It doesn't have to be the blue iris. It could be weeds in a vacant lot, or a few small stones. Just pay attention. Then patch a few words together. Don't try to make them elaborate. This isn't a contest, but the doorway into thanks, and a silence in which another voice may speak.
Right. So, she was here a few years ago, receiving a doctor honoris causa. Yeah, it was wonderful. I actually got to meet her. She's a wonderful person. Okay, questions from the audience. I'm going to run around and...
Thank you very much. Actually, it pertains to both Peter and Roshi's, some kind of crossover between that. I think of, when you talk about selection, a little bit about bracketing. I don't know if this is a kind of concept that really applies here, but it seems that something happens when we bracket, where we bracket, where we put the bracket, and that affects the perception, what's in and out, the reference points around it, one thing against the other, and that's how we get the difference between colors, which are actually not presented, like the grays that are actually of equal value but appear differently, or the various effects in our mind. So the power of our mind to bracket or to pay attention to specific things and exclude others in the objective field, comparing one thing against the other, is quite interesting as a power of the mind, an ability of the mind. In the discussion about the sort of phenomenological issues, so I guess just a very rough way of saying it is we're able to bracket what is subjective out. The idea we can just focus on the objective as an entire field. And we're able to do that somehow. We understand on some level what that means, and that's been effective for science to create various sort of things within the horizon of the objective that it can identify and compare, analyze. When I hear Roshi speaking about mind and looking for the mind, to me that seems to be an attempt to bracket out the objective. To entirely bracket out objective and focus on the subjective. From the perspective of Buddhism, of course, mind cannot see mind, it cannot see itself, but there's a certain question mark there, and there's a discussion amongst philosophers about what that might mean. But the idea that the power of the mind is to bracket, or one of the features of mind is to bracket, what would you as a neuroscientist think is going on in that process, let's say of a meditator, when they're actually looking for mind? What is actually occurring in the brain? Where is that looking going? And how is it able to bracket out an objective and focus on a subjective thing? And I wonder if that's something you think you might be able to test. Is it simply by doing that and not finding that it produces a kind of a side effect? Or is there something that it is actually able to perceive in that bracketing? And if it is able to perceive something in that bracketing, the subject, then is that something that would not qualify by your definition of consciousness? And then finally, Roshi's final comment about the world and being with the world that would come back, or is it something that can only be witnessed at the horizon of consciousness?
Move.
Yeah, I've come across this term bracketing, and I think it's Husserl. Yeah, and So it's,
The main question is about the brain activity, how that be understood. The brain.
I think nobody deeply understands the brain. It's the most complicated thing in the known universe. And the deeper we go, it's very fractal. I mean, every level seems to involve incredible, complex chains of causation. So one answer is we don't know. But, okay. I do think that there's well, I guess you might call it a kind of awakening going on in civilization right now, which is, it has to do with, the introduction from these Eastern traditions of these methods, basing a spiritual life not upon belief, but upon practices. And all those practices, as far as I can tell, have to do with the cultivation of attention, especially volitional attention. Now, from a neuroscientific point of view, psychological point of view, these three ideas, volition, attention, or volitional attention, and consciousness are really married so closely that they are not separable. And in the West, anyway, traditionally there has not been much emphasis on cultivating attention. Right? We cultivate our bodies, we go to the gym, we get really hot, fit, but very few people are cultivating their inner mind by working on their mental muscles, right? And volitional attention is sort of the ultimate volitional mental muscle. And these practices, I think, are something like going to the gym for your mind. And if it's true that experience, subjective experience, that's I think it's redundant, right? Experience or consciousness is the domain over which this doer, this volitional attention can act. By transforming that doer, that operator, it transforms what can happen in that domain of the operands. And what people claim is you train it further and further and further, and you start to have radically different experiences. Now, some of those I'm skeptical of, like the idea that you'll start to experience past lives or something. But what do I know? But I do think volitional attention, saying, choosing to attend to this versus that, if that's what we mean by bracketing, has enormous downstream consequences. It's not just the strengthening of that ability to attend in the future, it's going to transform the very nature of your experience. I don't know if that's an answer, but...
I think you put it really well. And, really for most of us, most of the time, our attention is anywhere but here. And we all know multitasking has taken over everything, and, everybody's got their screens, and the ability to focus in that way is so, it's almost non-existent. So I'm very heartened by the number of people who are starting to realize that in their own lives and saying, I need some way of working with this, and I need to be able to be present and change that. So by you use that term bracketing. Every time something comes up that wants to carry your mind off, your thinking process off, every single new thought formation can be dropped. And it's possible. And the more you do that, you are going against the grain of what all of your conditioning has led you to. And the more you kind of make this new groove of attention, the more easily you can go into that in the midst of all of the things that are hurtling your way and taking you elsewhere.
I'll get to you, resistance.
Thank you. I have a question from Roshi. I was very struck when you said that we're always tripping over the holy, and then later on, nothing holy. Everything holy, nothing holy? Please discuss.
So here again, we get trapped by concepts, we get trapped by the dualistic nature of language. The moment we say it's holy, we make it into something unholy. The moment we say there is no holiness, as Bodhidharma did, we're liberated. Because we're not then thinking we have to find that holy place. When Nansen, another Zen master, said, ordinary mind is the way. Right? He wasn't saying, go find the way somewhere else. Go find the sacred way. You are, this moment, right now, living most holy. As it is now is most holy.
So I was thinking about this issue initially in relation to your talk, Peter, about the different levels of processing of the kind of bottom layer of information on the retina and then layers of processing. You talked about it in terms of 2 layers, 3 layers, but I assume that it's more or less of a continuum of degrees of processing. And the idea that normal perception, seeing the world as something that's created in some ways within the brain on the basis of interpreting that raw information. Then also there's the sense, as Roshi was just talking about, of cultivating the mind through a process of voluntary attention and a certain kind of effort. Which could be seen as perhaps connected in some ways with the brain's process of organizing the data, which is like, in a way, a certain kind of mental effort, although it's a subconscious thing. So I'm thinking about the more sort of, non-dual traditions, a little bit like Dzogchen in Tibetan Buddhism, where there is a letting go of any effort, and they'll say there is nothing to cultivate, and there's various ways that that's expressed through the tradition. And something that I found very, very interesting was some work by Castro, where he theorizes about the neurophysiology behind the enlightenment experience, or the non-dual experience. And very interestingly found that in the case, he studied a variety of people fairly accomplished in a number of different contemplative traditions. And he found that in the case of the people who were identifying what they were doing as entering the non-dual state, that what he found was that rather than a kind of marked signature of particular areas of activation in the brain, of a tremendous drop in activation in the brain. And this was connected with the idea that a more, I don't know what the word would be, but a more, clear or spiritual or enlightenment experience might involve the letting go of the more superficial, more elaborate, more recent levels of processing, and that consciousness begins to access experiences at a less processed level, dropping down towards less processed levels. Are you following me? No? Okay, well, like where I'm stuck in this paradox is that obviously if you drop down deep enough on the level of processing, you're just left with a bunch of flashing lights and this is not much use. But if you go too high on the level of processing, you're going into sort of abstractions and narrative stories that take you away from the immediacy of experience. So then I was thinking like maybe there's a sweet spot in terms of the levels, a number of levels of processing that's kind of most adaptive. So I guess that's all I want to say about it, and see if this sparks any responses.
Well, I would just want to urge a bit of a note of caution. I think a concept like awakening or enlightenment, it's misplaced concreteness to try to superimpose it on the brain in that way, because these concepts are embedded in practice traditions, in social contexts, in communities, in religious rituals, in philosophical explications, and the idea of taking something that's rich in all those dimensions and thinking that there's going to be a straightforward neural correlate of it. First of all, it makes all of the different ways in which the word enlightenment or awakening can be used uniform, but the way a Dzogchen person might use it in a particular context may be different from how a Chan or a Zen person or a Vedanta person or a Sufi mystic or a Christian mystic, and so we really need to be sensitive to those differences. And the analogy that I like to use is that it's a bit like thinking that, parenting is in the brain. I mean, we all, as human beings, have the possibility of being parents, and there's different ways to be a parent, and there's different ways to be good at it, and of course there's lots of ways to be bad at it. And of course we need a brain to parent, and if you're a good parent, that's going to involve, empathetic aspects of, or brain systems that are crucial for empathy. But it's not that parenting is in the brain. It's a much wider social phenomenon. So I think it's more helpful to think of enlightenment and awakening in that way. It's in the world and embedded, and it's not something it's in the head in that sense. That would be my view anyway.
I just want to add to that, because I think this is the crux of the biscuit, so to speak, right? Because the whole idea of non-dual, right? The whole idea of non-dual, this is what, sort of the thing that really slammed up against in a beautiful way with the koan practice, is that to be non-dual, right? Is you're trying to break this bond of opposition. There's this and there's that. There's Democrats and Republicans. There's materialism and there's idealism, and it's like this habit we're in that we just, and I don't know how to get out of it either, but I think there's a path that's opening up that none of us can really imagine where it's going to go. And so somehow the creative work has to be to really recognize that we're going to keep falling into that again and again. What is the mechanism in the brain? The mechanism in the brain that gives me this experience. And so what I love about phenomenology, it's sort of just completely forces you into this other thing, which is there's no mechanism. It's not about mechanisms, right? There's lived experience, whatever, that's the blind spot, whatever that means, right? And that's contemplative practice can sort of get you closer to the experience of that without all the filtering. That's the route. And there's something waiting for us there in physics, in philosophy, in neuroscience, that is just, the uncharted territory. But we really, literally don't even have the language yet to express it, because it's going to be a language that in some sense is going to have to work around the fact that language, as soon as you say something, you've lost it. So, yeah.
I'll just add that there's a wonderful passage in the Lankavatara Sutra. Things are not what they seem, nor are they otherwise.
So I'm not prepared to let go of the idea of a neural basis of consciousness, or the idea of mechanism, because I can go out and cut out a pencil eraser-shaped section of your brain, and poof, you won't see color. Another one, and you won't see motion, and another one, and you won't see shapes. Anyway, so we know we can manipulate neural activity, which will alter your consciousness very fundamentally. So I think that the Western notion of a physicalist conception of the universe alone is definitely not sufficient, because we know there's consciousness. But can the Western notion of an all-embodying conception of reality that does embrace consciousness, is that possible? I'm optimistic that it is possible. I don't think the Western tradition is going to do it alone. It's going to involve these new methods that are built around it's kind of like a science, but of consciousness itself.
So the problem, I think, is that we are slaves to dualities, explanatory power. It organizes reality, right? I mean, cold and hot and dark and light and male and female. And if we created a whole body of knowledge based on this, right? And so to go beyond that means to create other modes of explanatory powers that we don't really know what they are yet, but maybe that's where we're trying to learn from traditions like yours, where let go of this and maybe other gates will open, and that's, I think, the challenge. And from a scientific perspective, that's super hard to do, right? because we have to prove theorems, we have to solve equations, and all these things are based on a discourse where duality is absolutely essential, right? You need it, right? And so that's the difficulty, right? Because every scientific explanation that we can build of something depends on the concept of a boundary, where there is the stuff you want to explain within that boundary, and you are able to somehow, as you were saying, you poke, and and that's really the way we do it. And in a sense, the whole idea here is to transcend boundaries, and that is a hard thing to do. But the fact that we are identifying the issue is, I think, the first step towards going beyond it. So.
All right. So first, thanks so much. So I've become fascinated by, or curious about, or hopelessly confused about this idea of emotional valence. So, for instance, when I feel pain, I get out of bed at 1 in the morning to get a glass of water, and I smash my pinky toe on the metal frame of my bed. And instantaneously, I have this intrinsic experience of that pain as negative. And Roshi, you talked about getting locked into negative emotions. I'm interested both in a neuroscientific perspective and a Buddhist perspective on kind of the question of, is there a source of this understanding that this stimulus, you could imagine a computer taking in a stimulus and it wouldn't have any kind of valence to it. Is there a source of the stimulus having a positive or negative valence in our subjective experience? Why is it that I know that pain is bad? Why is it that I know that happiness is good or warmth is good? Where does that meaning that becomes attached to the stimulus come from? It's something that vexes me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
I have a possible answer, but I want other people to talk. Well, it has to do with survival. If pain were good, then you'd have your arm chopped off and be happy about it. So you must have thought about that too. So there is an evolutionary component to this.
But so, for instance, you can train a computer to try and survive. You can train a robot to not bump into things. But I don't know if it experiences it as negative.
Oh, that's right.
But just as kind of something to kind of causally avoid, rather than as a subjective perception, as meaning that gets attached to it.
That's it.
That's kind of what I'm getting.
The Zombie question.
So I think evolution answers the question of why we avoid it, but not why we experience it in that way, or how that meaning gets attached to it. I don't know, I don't think there's an answer, but I'm interested to know if, for instance, Buddhism might have an answer to the question of, is there a source for this, or what is the source of this? Maybe neuroscience as well.
I have no answer, but I will tell you that there is a difference, as has been said by many people, between pain and suffering. And so, when you have that, you attribute negativity to the pain. When you have the pain, it's ah! There's no story there. But then it was like, oh, maybe I broke my toe, and this is terrible, and now I won't be able to play soccer, blah blah blah. All the stories start up, and that's where the suffering comes in.
So I agree with Marcelo that these experiences that we call negative, most of them evolved as signals to guide us towards certain outcomes. And some of them are like physical pain, say you should stop damaging your tissues. And those animals that felt the opposite, pleasure, when they damaged their tissues, they got wiped out because they died. And we're not their descendants. Same, I would say, for suffering. There's different kinds of suffering, but one of them would be loneliness, and another would be alienation. Those also evolved as signals to guide us towards certain kinds of lives, affiliating with communities and so forth. So to the other question of why are they experienced at all, right? So this gets, you might say that there's qualia that are not teleological, like redness. It doesn't seem to lead us towards something. And then there's other qualia that are teleological in the sense that they are driving us towards some outcome, like pain or pleasure. And why are they experienced at all? I would say anything's experienced at all because this is the highly precompiled, highly pre-interpreted set of informational structures that you can attend to, or that attention operates over. And if you got rid of them, you couldn't attend to them. And they would have, so let's say that information just arose, you need to go to the bathroom. But I didn't feel like I need to go to the bathroom. I would go, I would just ignore it. Or, if I stubbed my toe and I might have some objective information, tissue damage, but it didn't hurt, I wouldn't do anything. So what these, making it at the level of qualia accomplishes is making it not ignorable. You have to pay attention to it. And so attention is, by the very architecture of qualia are not just things, they're processes, and they have a certain architecture and prioritization scheme. If pain is high in that hierarchy and attention is grabbed by this constantly, you're going to have to deal with it. You're going to have to go to the bathroom. You're going to have to tend to your wound. So evolution didn't just operate on our bodies, it operated on our mental processing architecture, and especially it led to this kind of consciousness that we have. We have the consciousness we have because this is the consciousness that led to animals that survived better in our world.
Sure. Well, just kind of very quickly as a clarification or follow-up, how within that model or either of those models do you explain the ability to remap the valence? So, for instance, kind of pain becoming pleasure, not just in terms of masochism, but in terms of, for instance, hiking a mountain where, at some point there are runner's high where the pain in your legs becomes something that you experience pleasure. How do you explain kind of the potential remapping of valence, or when you're sobbing out of suffering and then it becomes beautiful in a certain way and you start to, how does that shift of valence come from within those models?
It comes from meaning.
If you're hiking, you have a whole context with a narrative and a purpose about what you're doing, and we know that we can. And in a way, this is a very, very, I think, fundamental insight in Buddhism, is that situations that we experience as out of our control are ones in which we're much more likely to suffer. And situations that we think we are able in some ways to control, and one way we control things is through giving meaningful narratives about them, then we experience less suffering. Of course, at a deeper level, we may be sort of deeply, radically out of control, and so that's kind of, more fundamental existential suffering. But just at that level, I think, meaning making is a way that we can endure all sorts of things. And while I have the mic, actually, one thing I'll say about pain that actually relates to your question about different kinds of styles of contemplative practice and the relationship between the subjectivity and the objectivity is that there is actually some cognitive neuroscience and behavioral psychology work on the effects of different kinds of meditation practice on pain perception. And what they looked at, one study I'm thinking of in particular that was done by David Perlman in Richie Davidson's lab, is that they compared the experience of pain for these very precisely administered kind of tactile heat stimuli in meditators who were practicing a focused attention meditation, so a very sort of single-pointed, sustained concentration, versus practitioners of an open awareness meditation, where at least the idea behind the practice is not to, it requires a certain kind of attentional stability, but not to volitionally select or deselect, but to simply have a kind of stable openness and alertness to whatever arises, so that whatever is arised is noticed, but it's not sort of stuck to and can be, as it were, dropped very quickly. And what they found is that, that especially in the open awareness type of practice, that for the pain stimuli, there was a reduction in the self-reported unpleasantness of the stimuli, even though the intensity remained the same. So that the idea would be that there's still a registering, pain isn't one thing, there's still a registration of the intensity of it, but the unpleasantness of it can be modulated depending on the mental set of the kind of quality of attention and the kind of practice. And that's happening at a very basic level of valence that's even in a way you might think antecedent to a kind of narrative you might spin about it, about, oh, this is terrible that I, stubbed my toe, and, what a drag this is. So, but that kind of practice is one where, at least in terms of the way it's framed within the tradition, you're working in a way to undo the usual, grasp-or-grasped subject-object structure of the experience. And that seems to have measurable effects on how we respond to stimuli and experience them, as pleasant or unpleasant.
I wanted to just say one thing about this, because this is what I still keep working with, right? Because in some sense, you're asking for an evolutionary psychology explanation, right? Well, what happened in the world before I was around that sort of led to all, And of course, this goes to mechanism. Of course, there's part of that story that has to be true. But if experience is the basal structure, right? If we are locked in a horizon, then those are always stories. That's a story we tell ourselves. We're telling ourselves that, the idea that there are these things called neurons and they behave this way. These are all these are the structural invariants that Husserl talks about, that we pull out of this open field of experience, and then we tell ourselves narratives about it, and we construct machinery to, probe those things, and we get readings, and somehow that is way downstream from this brute experience or raw experience. And I don't know how to, that's what I'm really interested in, is how do I reconcile, clearly, there was evolution, but on the other hand, evolution is still just a story I'm telling, there's not this objective world sitting out there, right? So dinosaurs, right? I want to say there were dinosaurs, but on the other hand, all I've got are fossils, and I tell myself stories about evolution, I test those stories with my meters and dials, you know what I mean? So there's work to be done to figure out how to reconcile what comes from contemplative practice, or this, what comes from phenomenology, and this need we have for our dualistic storytelling, objective world, kind of ontological mania, we've been calling it.
So I think human beings have very different minds than even the mind of a chimpanzee, but certainly of a dog or something. And it's a real two-edged sword. I would say that even a dog, though, has sort of a dual aspect to its consciousness. It's experiencing the world perceptually, but then it can also dream. It can have an internal virtual reality kind of experience. Certainly that's true for us, right? You can imagine all kinds of stuff, and you're also consciously experiencing that. Now, I would say that we differ from chimps in that we take this to a real extreme. So that when we look at the world, we not only see the world perceptually, we have a mental model about it. And we have this constant dual experience. And we don't start out that way. I think when we were little, 1, 2, 3, we're more like a monkey or a dog. And in a way, you could say that's the beginner's mind. We don't experience things with this mental model going all the time, saying what we're experiencing. Right. So a little kid will say, "Oh, Mom, look at this birch tree. Look at the caterpillar. Oh my God, it has red eyes. Mom, look, red eyes." And the mother says, "Jimmy, I'm busy." And so the kid learns to kind of ignore the centrality of its direct experience, and it learns to focus on the mental models. And in a way, these contemplative traditions, in a way, are trying to bring us back to being like this little kid. But we can't, because these mental models are constantly going automatically. So really the trick is to go back to that initial state where the mental models are in sync, kind of, with this more ancient kind of consciousness of direct experience. It might say, I want to become enlightened like a dog. They're totally present, but no thanks. I don't want to give up my humanness. But I also don't want to live in this world of endless distraction and living in my mental models, which might just be all lies and false. But the whole society is driving us towards this with endless distraction. So all of you here, just by virtue of being here, you're part of the counterculture. The counterculture is not a bunch of hippies. It's people who are saying, enough of distraction. I'm going to focus my life. And so this is the counterculture now, and it's a good thing.
first place, I'm overwhelmed by your brilliance and your vocabulary. I speak Hoosier, so this will be on a sub-basal level. But first of all, language and culture. Evan was talking about last night something ungo-behindable or something like that. That's an English translation of a German word from Husserl. I looked that up, I speak German. And the original word is hintergehen, which means behind go. And it's basically used not for philosophy, but to express the idea of tax evasion. And this just illustrates how language and culture influence what you're talking about. And you've got to say hintergehen to another German. And he or she will get the idea, boy, that's not just ungo-behindable or go-behindable. It's also something that a con man would be really interested in, a tax evader, etc., etc. It's like going to Hitchcock to the hospital, which I did recently, and heard something that made me feel instantly better because it was a Latin name for my problem. It's idiopathic, Mr. Brown. And that means that's fancy Latin that doctors use to say, we don't know. But as long as I could tell myself it's idiopathic, I felt better. So that's the story. Last point is lived experiences. Seems to me very dualistic. It seems to imply there's dead experience. And back to German again. A lot of these guys who gave us these concepts were Germans. One of the key German words for experience is Erlebnis. The heart of that word is Leben, life. When you say experience in German, life is in that word. You don't have to say lived experience and imply that there's dead experience. So the way we hear that concept and understand that concept may be totally wrong. Thanks.
Thank you. I wanted to just quickly bring together, if we can, these ideas of duration from Bergson, and thank you, physicist, for bringing Bergson here, and the horizon. I think there's a really interesting way we can relate these things, because in terms of duality, space and time are one of our fundamental ways we break things down in Western culture. And when we think about time, we think of it as having no place. And I wonder if what's happening in contemplative practice and in training attention is that we're finding a way for time to occupy more space such that time fills that horizon and we can shift our attention in different ways within that extended time space. And I just wondered if anybody wants to think about that with me.
Great idea.
First, I just wanted just a response about the language, which is exactly what I'm talking about. We have an impoverished language for trying to talk about it. So, when I try and talk to physicists, it's like not making any sense because there's so few words to use to describe this. Whereas, it seems like in the long tradition of Indian and Chinese and Japanese culture and their philosophy, they've got a million words for this. So that's part of the dilemma. So right, and what we end up doing is I have to take words from Heidegger, which they seem to be hard enough to understand in German, but then when you translate them into English, that just sounds like gobbledygook. But the point about duration and time, I think, is a very interesting one because there's Dogen's on the Uji, for the time being. It's one of the most amazing parts of Shogun Genzo, where for the time being, you're 10,000 armed dragon, or it's this whole unpacking in that one about being and time, right? So Heidegger also being and time, so that, and then I'm free associating their being, right? The whole point of Dasein, one of the reasons I love the idea of Dasein, it's the being which is inherently time that has a there. So I think the spatialization of time that's what we are. We're the lit up place in being, right? So this goes to this question of what is being like without us. In some sense, that's what can I say about that? There may be nothing to say about it. It may not even be a word or a concept that makes sense. But we are the place in being that is lit up, that's the luminosity, And that is time. I mean, in some sense, I think there's a lot to unpack in all this. There's work to be done, but that's, anybody else?
My experience, you put it very well in your question. I think I can just say 2 words: time unfolds. And when you are in that experience of time unfolding, there is not a gap, not even one hair's breadth of a gap. You are being time.
So in German, I heard, was it Heidegger? I forget. Somebody used the term Lichtturm as a light column. Is it consciousness? Does it ring a bell? Consciousness is like a column of light coming through the forest, and where that light is cast, that's where consciousness is. Which relates, I think, to this word, the notion of a horizon. Who was it? Heidegger.
The clearing.
The clearing, I guess in English. But I guess as a believer in evolution, I believe we evolved from things that preceded us, and if you go far enough back, there were no living things. Right? I mean, that's what the evidence tells us, and presumably without any living things with brains or something like brains, there was no consciousness. So I guess I still adhere to the notion that there's something, if you eliminated all conscious beings, there would be something, whatever that is, I don't know, whatever this noumenal thing is. We emerge from that via our ocean, but here we are. Okay, now to the question of duration, I think, it's very contested even within physics, right? So if you look at classical Newtonian kind of physics, or even Einsteinian physics, time is sort of smooth, it's infinitesimal, infinitesimal moments, right? Whereas in quantum theory, one of the basic equations implies, it's delta E times delta T has got to be greater than Planck's amount. That's a finite amount of, I think it's action is this fundamental substance. So quantum theory is fundamentally durational. And I don't know how you guys are going to bridge that. But that seems unbridgeable to me. Either duration is the fundamental idea, and it has a duration, right? It's not infinitesimal, or time is infinitesimal. My guess is that ultimately quantum theory will be, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's one. Quantum theory has one. It's done. I just wanted to say, so there's a little trick we do in physics where we transform time into space. And it's really simple mathematically. You have to multiply by an imaginary number. And then when you do that, time becomes space, and then you create, instead of a 3-dimensional space and a 1-dimensional time, you create a 4-dimensional space-time. And where there is no duration, there is just extension. And maybe in a sense, that's kind of what's going on, right? There's extension, and perhaps that's what you meant by time unfolding. And some people speculate that the beginning of the universe was this state of timelessness before anything else. The fancy word for that is an Euclidean space-time, right? And so there was this initial state that was somehow unstable, and this somehow is backed with not knowing anything about it. And eventually time popped up as an emergent phenomenon from this initial state of timelessness. So there's some narrative that we create based on this stuff. So it's a new concept. So here we are. Okay, we have time for one more question. Here we go.
First, thank you so much for the wonderful and enlightening lecture. I mean, some lecture could be by day, and this, I think, at least make years. Let's get back to, I have a question for Roshi, I think. So let's get back to the story of Bodhidharma and his student. His student cut his arm and being asked, give me your mind and I'll pacify that for you. And he said, I cannot find my mind. So my question is, he said, I cannot find my mind. So his mind has already vanished somehow. So who cannot find mind? What is left when mind has vanished? Is there a even higher reference, or this is even a wrong question? And a second related question is, if mind could vanish, if something could vanish, it could be born. It could be arises. So if vanish, our mind could help us live much better, as you just point out. So what is the point of even develop that in the first moment? And wouldn't, I mean, back to the evolution theory, why would the creature be so fool to develop this? That kind of is contradictory of the theory, because all the living things can optimize their living condition, right? Yeah, thanks.
The mind of Eka standing there saying, please help me pacify my mind. The mind was filled with all kinds of things, all kinds of emotions, distress, right? Suffering. And what Bodhidharma did when he said, bring me your mind, he sent him into this place where that mind of conceptual, dualistic, storytelling fell away. Only thing was left, mind. Pure, lucid awareness. Nothing in the way. Vast emptiness. There, he said, I have pacified your mind by sending you on this search for mind, looking at all the things that are in your mind, realizing none of that is it. Asking, who is it? Who is searching? All of these questions you said, right? Absolutely essential. This is the spiritual path. When he said this, there, I have pacified your mind. Of course, the words used are we can misunderstand. Bodhidharma, pacified his mind? No, of course not. But by throwing him into that search, so completely, 100%, mind, what is it? What is it? Where is it? I have no mind to show. All that mind I thought was, oh my God, I was so aggravated, please help me. God. Okay?
Can I add something? So a fun exercise to try is to try to avoid the word I or my. And it's actually hard, I think that we come into the world, there's these languages that have words like I, and I have experiences. But let's try to say, this body is hungry, or maybe hunger is happening, hungering. It becomes very strange, but maybe eventually languages will look different when we get to this different place to reflect that. But any of you who have had kids, they're like, that's my piece of cake. When I threw my kids into kindergarten in Germany, and the first things they learned was, that's mine, and the second thing was, go away. So I think it's really ancient stuff, and you can imagine, given limited resources in the world, that evolution would lead to beings with an ego, because that would lead to better survival. Take. But we don't live in that kind of world anymore. There's endless, we have way more than we need, and yet this ego, which might have evolved for good reason, is actually making us miserable. And then the question is, how do you then rein that in? And I think these contemplative traditions are part of that. I think the Western traditions have a lot of things to offer too, right? Like Jesus' message of just loving your neighbor as if they were yourself, and forgiving. There's a lot in all these ancient traditions, but a lot of them zoom in on this issue of confronting egotism because it seems to be at the heart of so much human suffering. And I think some of these methods will help get us there. But the world is just rife with egotism and it's getting worse. And I think, these systems we've created, like capitalism, seem to enforce it. So it's not only enforcing endless distraction with these devices, but enforcing greed and materialism. So you as the counterculture just have to kind of spread it out. And it begins with practice.
On those words, I think we can end this session and the conference. Thank you so much.